6 years of hard training and actual battle experience in Spain and Poland had made the German army look invincible. But what about the British and French? First, let's take up the British. They started from scratch, but both at home and abroad, an army was growing. And Britain had one weapon that was ready. But if the Norwegians had had X-ray eyes, this is what they would have seen. The Trojan horse of ancient Greece brought up to date with new and deadlier weapons. At the precise moment that the Nazis overran Denmark,
and Hitler had another victory. He had hijacked 2 more countries. The world wondered and sometimes marveled at this man's efficiency. Gangster Dillinger was efficient too. When a man or a nation throws away all regard for the laws of God and man, he is bound to be more efficient than his victims. Society had a police force to deal with Gangster Dillinger, but it had no police force to deal with Gangster Hitler. So he clubbed Norway into submission and got what he wanted, bases for use against Britain. Now he had the northern claw of an enormous pincer movement. A drive through France would give him the southern claw. Blockade by U-boats coupled with mass bombing attacks would weaken the British for final invasion. Then, with Britain gone, Germany could reach out in all directions for world conquest. His next move must obviously be through France, to get his southern claw. Through France. How was she to face the onslaught? These scenes are ancient history. They occurred in 1914. The German armies, without warning, had smashed across neutral Belgium, invaded France, reached the River Marne only a few miles from Paris. Out of the French capital poured the French reserves, riding out to battle the enemy in every vehicle that could move. The famous taxicab army. Note well, it was riding out to battle. In the center of the French line stood the 9th French Army, commanded by a then comparatively unknown general. On September 5th, 1914, he is reputed to have said, "My right is driven in. My center is giving way. The situation is excellent. I attack." Attack. The German onslaught was checked, and Paris was saved. That comparatively unknown general later became commander-in-chief of all the Allied armies and presided at the signing of the armistice with the defeated Germans on November 11, 1918. To this general, the French people erected a monument. To Marshal Ferdinand Foch, whose motto was, "Attack, always attack."
Still later, the war-weary French people erected another monument. This one to a minister of war, André Maginot. Between the ideas symbolized by these 2 statues may well lie the military story of the fall of a great nation. In Foch's time, the proud spirit of France demanded nothing less than victory and placed its faith in the attack. In Maginot's time, the spirit, no longer proud, asked only to avoid defeat and placed its faith in concrete. And when France was finally forced to declare war against the rising Nazi menace, in the first place, between 1914 and 1918, the French suffered more than 6 million casualties in the heroic defense of their land against German invasion. The flower of an entire generation was lost, with its stimulus of new blood, new determination, new ideals. Secondly, the failure of the League of Nations, to which the French had pinned their hopes of peace, the corruption of many in high places, the greed of special interests, All had combined to shake the faith of the French people in their democratic ideals. And when a people loses its faith in its own ideals, it is ripe for the insidious words of the devil. France still looked like an imposing castle, but Hitler's political termites had so gnawed away the binding of national unity that the castle was ready to crumble. How would they strike this time? Through Alsace-Lorraine as in 1870? Through the Low Countries as in 1914? What was the 1940 model conquest? The French considered the Maginot Line utterly impregnable, and therefore believed the Germans would again try a swing through the Low Countries as in 1914. But even after Hitler's rape of Scandinavia, Holland and Belgium, hoping against hope, still clung to their neutrality. So the French massed 78 divisions here along the border of Belgium. 17 were in the Maginot Line. 10 divisions here in case Mussolini got bold. 3.5 as a safeguard against Spain. The British had 10 divisions here. The Allied strategy in the event of an attack against the Low Countries was to swing their armies like a gate into Belgium, the hinge being the north end of the Maginot Line. This all-important hinge was protected by the forest of the Ardennes, a hilly and thickly wooded area, honeycombed with streams, its road. The Nazis methodically bombed little towns and villages, otherwise devoid of any military value, not so much to kill as to drive the inhabitants out onto the highways. Then, by expert machine gunning, the Nazis would herd them along in terror-stricken flight to hopelessly entangle the advancing Allied armies. And what about the Allies? They were convinced that the German attack on Belgium and Holland was the main thrust, and according to plan had swung their armies like a gate into Belgium. But the attack on Belgium and Holland was only a feint. The main German attack would... Watch the map as one of our intelligence officers explains the details of the German breakthrough.
We speak of the breakthrough at Sedan, but actually the break was along a wide front, extending for 50 miles from Namur in Belgium to Sedan. Further north, the Allied armies had swung like a gate into these positions. The German armies had swept over Holland, broken the line of the Albert Canal, and for all anyone knew, were preparing to smash against the Allied front with all their power. That was the situation, dangerous but obscure, on the evening of May 13th. On the 14th and 15th, it became clear that the German breakthrough south of Namur was in the greatest strength, and that the French 9th Army, attacked while moving into position, had been shattered. Without doubt, this was the point of mortal danger, and the French High Command ordered the abandonment of these positions, although they had not yet been attacked. Those positions were abandoned solely because of the situation developing along the Meuse near Sedan. In the meantime, the French 7th Army had been ordered to make its historic forced march far to the south into the area threatened by the rapidly advancing German spearheads. This army was not used to attack the German flank, but rather was used as a plug to restore the broken front. Throughout, the Allies had placed their faith not in offense, but in defense, and the defense was doomed to failure because it was confronted with an entirely new technique in warfare, the plain tank infantry team in action. The world was staggered by the speed with which the German armored columns moved. What was the secret that enabled armies to move so far so rapidly? The secret lay in the organization of the striking spearhead. Armored forces came first, closely followed by motorized divisions, which peeled off, forming solid walls. And through the corridor thus formed, raced the supply trucks to feed the ever-lengthening column. It was obvious that if the Allied situation was to be restored, the German column would have to be cut. On May 17th, General de Gaulle attacked the German flank and captured a few prisoners. But his light mechanized forces were like a pin pricking the side of a rhinoceros. A subsequent attack met with even less success. The means for a really successful counterattack against the German corridor simply did not exist. Where numbers of divisions were required, only handfuls of companies and battalions were available. A valiant attempt to cut the German corridor was made by a group of slow-moving British tanks just south of Arras. But lack of sustained striking power doomed this valiant unit to destruction. On May 21st, the German spearhead reached the channel port of Abbeville. Protecting their flank along the Somme, the Germans fanned out to the north and east. This was to be the perfect battle of annihilation. On May 28th, the Belgian army, compressed into a small space and weary of battle, laid down its arms. That left the desperate French and British defenders with their backs to the sea at the small channel port of Dunkirk.
One of the greatest disasters in history seemed in the making. An entire British army faced annihilation. Their armor. High overhead, British fighter planes fought the Luftwaffe to a standstill. Below, small Allied suicide units held the Germans back long enough for the miracle of Dunkirk to take place. $211,500 British troops, plus 112,500 French and Belgian were rescued. Over 300,000 balls. The harder they fall, the higher they bounce. Leading the British by this time was a man who had been bouncing all his life, Winston Churchill, who had tried for years to warn the world about Germany. Meantime, the situation that faced France was as nearly hopeless as a military situation can be. 2/5 of the French army was lost. There were fewer than 50 divisions left to defend a front almost 200 miles long, running from the northern end of the Maginot Line to the sea. And behind that thin front line, there were no reserves.
The first blow fell on June 5th. The French resistance was determined, but by June 8th, the left flank army had been shattered, and a general withdrawal was ordered to the line of the Marne and the Seine. On June 9th, the German main attack came. Within 2 days, the German armored and motorized divisions roared out into the open terrain. With this breakthrough, the issue of the Battle of France was decided, and from that time on, there was official talk of an armistice. Now, what about the famous Maginot Line? Let's go back and take a look. On June 14th, the Germans launched 2 attacks against the Maginot Line. In both cases, penetrations were effected. But we must remember that this was against fortifications defended by men devoid of hope.
Must slave on farm or in factory for the Nazi master race, or starve. There will be a class of subject alien races. We need not hesitate to call them slaves. Flags would again be unfurled in North Africa, alongside the Stars and Stripes, alongside the Union Jack. Once more, their leaders, General de Gaulle and the famous General Giraud, stand united in the common cause with the leaders of their allies. Once more, the red, white, and blue of France is raised on high. For our out of the ashes of the defeat and the humiliation of France, her soul has been born again.
The shadow of the conquering German armies covered Western Europe. The self-styled master race was riding high. Adolf Hitler stood just as Napoleon had stood more than 100 years before, and looked across the English Channel to the one fighting obstacle that stood between him and world domination. The chopped cliffs of Britain rose sheer and white out of the choppy waters. And beyond, a little island, smaller than the state of Wyoming. Crush that little island and its stubborn people, and the way was open for world conquest. The fall of Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, France had given him more than 100 million slaves to work for him or starve. The preliminaries were over. It was time for the main event, the Battle of Britain. Hitler and his generals feverishly drafted their plans for the conquest of Britain. Every detail must be anticipated. A slip now might wreck the whole timetable of world conquest. 6 weeks of final preparation went into those plans. 6 weeks to determine the history of 1,000 years. The thing was foolproof. See for yourselves how simple the whole operation was to be. Look.
German plan for invasion of England. Phase 1. Knock out the Royal Air Force and its bases. Get control of the air and the sea lanes across the Channel. Follow the Blitz plan that had wiped out Poland, the Low Countries, and France. Destroy communication and transport lines. Above all, get command of the air. Phase 2. Pulverize the coastline with dive bombers. Drop parachute troops to take over the airfields and establish beachheads. Phase 3. Actual invasion. Pour the German panzer divisions across in high-speed barges under an umbrella protecting fighter planes. send spearheads of armed might to divide, surround, destroy all opposition. That's all there was to it. Conquer Britain. Force the surrender of the British fleet. Then, with the combined sea power of Germany, Britain, Italy, France, and Japan, he could control the seas and tell us where to head in. The torch of freedom flickered low.
On the Channel invasion coasts, more than 100 fully equipped German divisions were singing the Nazi theme song, "We are sailing against England," as they waited the word from Hitler. Here, for weeks, all the supplies and weapons of the Nazi war machine had been turned toward Britain. The jaws of the Nazi whale were set to swallow Jonah.
And what about Jonah? How was he doing? Well, Britain also had an army, but it was an army dragged from the sea at Dunkirk. An army without weapons. These had been left behind on the roads of France. Tanks, guns, motorized equipment, all abandoned to save the one priceless. Only one tank for every 1,000 square miles of territory. Only one machine gun for every 1,500 yards of beach. Britain had a navy too, but it was scattered all over the globe, guarding vital food and supply lines. And the British knew it would be suicide to use their fleet in the narrow waters of the English Channel with the German Air Force in control of the air. Britain also had an Air Force. An Air Force outnumbered 10 to 1 by the enemy, both in men and machines. And then there was Britain herself, the people of Britain, the people who were to be terrorized and forced to surrender. They knew that every man, woman, and child, in uniform or out, would be Hitler's target in the onslaught that might come at any moment. They knew they had a job to do, and not much time to do it in. The young, the not so young, and the old. The clerk, the butcher, the farmer, the member of parliament, they formed the civilian army, Britain's home guard. They started from scratch. Experience, equipment, supplies, all were scarce. Only one shell to fire at each practice. The women of Britain refused to be left out.
We'll enlist too. We'll put up the barrage balloons. Man the ack guns. We'll run the railroads and get the trains through on time. Ferry the planes. Carry the dispatches. Drive the ambulances and run the buses. And we'll see that our men are fed and don't go hungry.
Others work, men and women alike. They worked full time, overtime, double time, 40 hours a week, 50, 60, 70. Hours meant nothing.
fatigue meant nothing. Until the government forced them to cut down hours because overfatigue was hurting production. And when they weren't working, the men patrolled the moors for parachutists, blocked the roads, rehearsed invasion defenses. For something had happened here the Germans could never understand. In a democracy, it is not the government that makes war. It is the people. To lead them, the people had chosen Winston Churchill as their prime minister. And he spoke the words in every British heart when he said,
"We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on beaches, landing grounds, in fields, in streets, and on the hills. We shall never surrender."
This was Britain in its darkest hour. The people knew they were in for the worst the Nazi mind could invent, yet they didn't panic or run away. They patrolled and waited. They drilled and waited. They worked and waited. Waited for the terror they knew was coming. Then it came. That's the sound that became part of the life of every man, woman, and child in Britain.
August 8th, 1940, and the battle for Britain is on.
30 enemy aircraft over the channel, flying due west.
Here comes the Luftwaffe. In dozens of flights, hundreds of planes, bombers, fighters, dive bombers, across that 21 miles of channel, that 8 short minutes of water. Their first tactics were to bomb convoys in the channel. Convoys loaded with food and munitions, bound for the great port of London. Fighters waited overhead for the defending planes of the Royal Air Force, the RAF, to appear. They didn't have long to wait. Came, facing odds of 6, 8, 10 to 1, and dove in, shouting the old hunting cry, "Tally-ho!" Phase 1 of the Nazi plan called for the RAF to be knocked out of the air. But the men of the RAF hadn't read the Nazi plan. RAF knocked 182 German planes out of the sky.
For the next week, the Germans attacked the coast cities from the Thames River to Weymouth.
Take cover.
And Hitler paid off with 180 more planes.
Then the Luftwaffe battered the great port towns of Southampton, Plymouth, trying for a knockout before the flow of supplies from overseas became more than a trickle. The ports took a terrible pounding, but they couldn't be knocked out. Cargoes went on being unloaded with the protection of the RAF overhead. Battling the Spitfires and Hurricanes in the air wasn't panning out.
So Goering switched his main attacks to the fighter airfields, Dover, Deal, Hawking. Maybe he could destroy the planes on the ground. He bombed the airfields, and the fields were hit. But the planes were saved. For Britain, unlike Poland and the Low Countries, didn't make the mistake of bunching its planes on the runways. The planes of the RAF were scattered and hidden, only a few on any one field, and those in the far corners. The Spitfires still went up to meet the enemy.
In the first 10 days of the Battle of Britain, Goering launched 26 major attacks to get command of the air and lost 697 aircraft. The British lost 153, and 60 British pilots bailed out. Valuable trained men were saved and ready to fight again, but the crews of Goering's planes were lost to him forever. The pace was too hot. Something was going haywire. The Nazis had to call time out. On a 2,000-mile front, from Norway to France, the whole Nazi Blitz program was being stalled because the RAF was still in the air. The shock troops were getting hoarse from singing, "We are sailing against England." The long-range German guns were getting hot from throwing shells across the channel. In public, Hitler assured the Germans, "Mr. Churchill tells his people that England will win, but I tell you that victory will belong to Germany." But in private, he sent for Goering, the boss of the Luftwaffe, and put him on the hot seat. Goering was told to do something and do it quick. So on August 30th, he ordered all-out attacks on inland aerodromes and industrial centers. Maybe he could knock out the RAF on the assembly line. And he adopted new tactics, too. More fighters and fewer bombers. Or maybe he just had fewer bombers to send. Anyway, those he did send were well protected. Fighters above at high altitudes. Fighters on both sides. Fighters in the front and in the rear. Fighters weaving in and out of the bomber formations.
Britain, winner of the first round, was ready. With higher morale and sharper defense, improved listening posts were set up all along the coast and warned of the enemy's approach before he left the continent. A quick flash from the control station to the fighter station, and pilots were on their way to meet the enemy while he was still over the channel. Day after day, out of sight and almost out of sound of the watchers on the cliffs, 4, 5, and 6 miles above, the battles raged over the Dover area. The Dover area became known as Hell's Corner. By sheer weight of numbers, the enemy again and again broke through the coastal defenses. And reached inland to the airdrome. Aircraft plants, munition factories and machine shops.
Hello, gunfire in the southeast. Right.
The workers kept on working, and the RAF kept on flying. These few men with wings, alone in the sky, behind their motors and machine guns, were shooting down more than the Luftwaffe. They were smashing the whole Nazi plan of world conquest.
Johnny?
109 destroyed, Freddie, yes.
Oh, good show. How'd you get on, sir?
I had a wonderful party, thanks.
Are you all right? You get any of the batters? Yes, I got a Messerschmitt 109 in Adonia.
Between August 24th and September 5th, 35 major attacks were launched. They cost the Germans 562 planes, while the British lost only 219 planes and saved 132 pilots. Invasion plans were going completely haywire. The Nazis were blind with rage. The German mind has never understood why free people fight on against overwhelming odds. Hitler now knew he was superior in every weapon except the weapon of spirit. So he told Goering, break that spirit, crush the people, crush the spirit of democratic life itself. Invasion now would have to wait. The Nazis would avoid the RAF and smash the great city of London into the rubble heap they had made of Warsaw and Rotterdam.
Could London take it? Even the people themselves didn't know the answer. The defenses they trusted in were London's hastily assembled anti-aircraft, the ack-ack guns, the balloon barrage which kept the raiders at high altitudes, the Royal Air Force, now down to its last reserves, and the plain, downright guts of the people. They sent more children out of the city. Tightened air raid precautions, stationed more airplane spotters, rehearsed firefighters, moved into bomb shelters. They blacked out their city and carried on.
first blow, aimed to crush the British spirit, came on September 7th.
Planes coming in. Control room speaking. Customers and staff will now take cover in the basement. Please do not run, but keep moving.
Downstairs, or you can use the escalator.
Third floor, clear.
Second floor clear.
First floor, clear.
That day, when 375 German planes came roaring up the Thames River, the Battle of Britain became the Battle of London. The Germans broke through the charge of Hurricanes and Spitfires that went out to meet them. Gone was any pretense of aiming at military objectives. This was just savage destruction. Fell alike on the homes of the East End poor and the Mayfair rich, on shops, hospitals, churches.
For 28 days, the Nazis were to drop everything in the book on the city of London. Tons upon tons of high explosives, delayed action bombs that exploded days later, torpedoes that sheared away whole buildings. And underneath the war in the air, the war of the man in the street went on. He learned to exist with very little food. He forgot what it meant to have a night's sleep, spending most of his time underground in the damp and dark and cold.
Hello, Mrs. Fox. You're here early tonight.
Well, I'm on the safe side, aren't I?
I think that'll be all right now.
Yes, that's grand.
Anyway, I'll be back in a few minutes if you want.
Now, how are we going to get you up there? Get a young man to lift you up. Barney?
Hello.
Tell this young lady to lift up.
Righto, I'm coming.
The air raid wardens stayed at their posts. Doctors and nurses worked on steadily as the bombs crashed all around them. Rescue squads labored night and day.
Hi, Gordon. I found her.
Is she dead?
Fight, Doug.
Firemen said, nuts to the bombs and battled to put out fires. This was life in the Blitz. Against all the rules of Nazi warfare, Britain was refusing to crumple up.
Across the Channel, the enraged Goering took personal command of the operations. And on September 15th, he sent the Luftwaffe into one of its greatest attacks. German bombers and Messerschmitt fighters roared over the English coast.
Starmouth calling. Planes heard 3 miles southwest.
Shout for hostile planes approaching from the southwest.
The British met the challenge by throwing in everything they had. historic three-dimensional battle took place inside an area 60 miles long, 38 broad, and from 5 to 6 miles high. 200 individual dogfights took place within the first 30 minutes of the raid.
Right on our own doorstep. Oh, what a spread.
London 1.
Thank you, Center. We'll keep a lookout for them. Hostile formation to the south.
Some of the German bombers broke through London's defenses. And reached the center of the city.
Doggy, where are you? Blimey, I thought they'd got you.
Who, me? Nah, I had my fingers crossed.
Ministry communique. The biggest bag yet. 185 enemy aircraft shot down. End of message.
Of the 500 German planes that came over that day, more than 1/3 were shot down.
In the 28 days of terror from September 7th to October 5th, the Nazis dropped 50 million pounds of bombs on the city, killed 7,000 helpless civilians, and wounded 10,000 more. Bombs fell on Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, the Houses of Parliament, Fleet Street, the center of the news, St. Paul's Cathedral. Bombs blasting the historic past out of the lives of Englishmen. But in these 28 days, the Nazis lost 900 planes and their crews. The more they sent over, the more were shot down. The British Spitfire had proved to be one of the deadliest weapons ever put in the hands of man. If this kept up, pretty soon no more Luftwaffe.
The frantic Nazis had to pull a new one. They did. On October 6th, they changed to night attacks. Maybe that way they could avoid those deadly Spitfires and Hurricanes. Maybe that way they could crush the stubborn British spirit. Never mind control of the air. Never mind Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3. Now to concentrate on bombing the people themselves into submission and make them cry for mercy.
Hostile raid, sir.
Wasn't much help at night. This was just German bombs against British guts.
Harvey?
Hello, Jack.
Sound happy enough down there tonight, don't they?
Yes, they're all right.
The great docks of London were left roaring infernos. Homes were destroyed by incendiaries. Business blocks were aflame.
And still the people of London took it. Night after night they burrowed underground. And morning after morning they dug themselves out of the wreckage.
Good morning, Mrs. Ford. Good morning, Mr. Arms. See you tonight. Righty-o. Come on, Bessie. Would you like to sit down? Thanks.
Morning, Mr. Arndt. Sleep well?
Fine, thanks. Wasn't it a quiet night?
What about the one that came down about 2?
I didn't hear it. Did you? No.
Oh, we're getting used to them around here. Better go away from this for a bit.
Of course not. It'd take more than this to get me out of my home. Now go on, you've got to get to work.
Okay. The Battle of London was the battle of the people of the city. In spite of bombs and fire and death, they got to their desks and workbenches to spend another 10 or 12 hours working, working, working. The British spirit was stronger than ever. And the RAF was flying higher than ever. Not only higher, but farther.
SIO, operation for tonight.
GP 1562, EP 781, 10 aircraft. You'll find, I think, a decent photograph of the submarine yards there.
There's a very good one taken the other night, Monty.
Was there?
A bit further along.
That's it. Those are the submarine yards.
There.
Just there.
Yes.
Well, chaps, this is your target for tonight. It's the submarine and shipbuilding yards at Bremen. It's a vitally important target, and it's got to be hit hard.
In the midst of this life and death struggle, the British found strength not only to defend, but to counterattack with what few bombers they could get together.
Charlie, airborne, sir.
Hello, rear gunner. Can you hear me?
okay, Skipper?
Hello, operator. Everything okay?
Well, it seems to be all here, sir.
Stand by. I'm going in a glide.
Steady. I got the bullseye with the last one.
Here was the RAF giving it back. Hitler cried, "Night gangsters! For this crime I will exact 1,000-fold revenge." All the available German night bombers were put into the air.
Thousand-fold revenge was Coventry. On the night of November 14th, £1 million of bombs were dropped on the city. Coventry was smashed as flat as Warsaw and Rotterdam. The people of Coventry dug their loved ones out of the blasted ruins, saw them to their last resting place in a common grave.
Hitler could kill them, but damned if he could lick them. They went back to their lathes and machines, for they knew the machine bench was as deadly a weapon as the rifle. And in their hearts was a grim determination that this enemy must be destroyed, that the day was coming when they would strike back, and how they would strike back.
Christmas, 1940. season of peace on earth, goodwill toward men, was the ironic quiet before Hitler's great burst of rage against a people who couldn't be licked. Bomb them into submission, so he would burn them to ashes.
Millions of firebombs rained down on the great city of London. Of minutes, more than 1,500 different sections of the city burst into roaring flames. Flames that swiftly merged into the greatest fire in recorded history. In the midst of all the fire and destruction, vital water mains were shattered. Water pressure was almost entirely cut off. Heroes of the night were men of the London Fire Brigade who stretched temporary hose lines out to the center of the Thames River, struggling through mud and slime. For the Nazis had carefully picked a night on which the Thames River had one of the lowest ebb tides on record. And while London burned above them, the people of the city held on, chin up and thumbs up. They knew this was the people's war, and they were the people. And a people that couldn't be panicked, couldn't be beaten. In the months to come, the British were to suffer many such bombings and burnings. But a nation that calls on cold courage when hot courage runs thin may die, but it can't be defeated.